Right, so our lab this week is taking us into the actual accessing of the database. There's a couple of things in there that we need to think about. So there's the accessing of the database and there's the error reporting. So those are two crucial things that we're going to be looking at in these slides. We're going to introduce the PDO library. We've got how to select stuff. Then there's also inserting, updating and deleting, and using your own classes with database data. That bit is the bit that if folk haven't followed through and looked carefully at the slides and seen how they apply, you could come unglued. Looked carefully at the slides and seen how they apply, you could come unglued in the workshop, or at least you'll think it's working and you might get a little bit tangled and you'll be wondering why we're saying this is not a good way to do things. So what is PDO? You haven't come, well, this is, the PHP stuff is new, so the PDO stuff is probably new. Okay, so what is PDO? It's a library for working with most regular database engines, and it's a PHP approach. So since it will work with most database engines, it most definitely works with MySQL. It's called PHP Data Objects, PDO. It's designed to work well with classes. So data objects, yeah, so we're thinking object stuff. And that's why we want to, well, there's several reasons why we want to go that way, which we'll see as we come through the slides. So in order to get connected, you'll need the type of database, which in our case is going to be MySQL. You'll need the server host name, you'll need the database username, the database password, and the database schema. You'll need all of that to make your connection. So you'll need a connection string that you build up. So you need to name the driver, what type of database you're connecting to. You'll need the host name and the schema. So, which might be called a data source name, and it will look like this. So it'll be whatever the driver is, host equals host name, semicolon, DB name equals schema. So you've got, for example, MySQL, whatever your host name is, host rather, equals whatever your server is, semicolon, database name equals, and then whatever your schema name is. That's the format of it. So we might put this in an include file as the obvious way to do it, so that you're not having to do it in every page. That's the last thing you want to do. So we'll make an include file, and within our include file, we'll instantiate a new PDO instance, and then we'll connect. And a little reminder that the parameters are connection string, username and password. So how do we do it? We're going to say $db, or DB connection we might want in there or something, something to remind us it's our connection to the database. So $db equals new PDO, PHP data object, MySQL host equals whatever the host name is, DB name equals whatever the schema is, comma, whatever the username is and whatever the password is. You might very well have those, of course, in actual coding as variables. So $host name, $schema, $username, $password, and they might be defined as attributes. Things like username and password might come through as parameters to whatever the including function is, maybe. So that's our structure. So we need to do two more things here. We need to do two more things, okay? Because we want to tell PDO to return objects, not arrays. By default, PDO will return arrays. For our purposes, because we're thinking objects in the labs, in the module, in the coding examples, we need to say, let's keep it consistent. So we'll do, having set up our database connection, we'll do DB set attribute method, and we'll give it PDO attribute default fetch mode is PDO fetch object, and that will tell it to, when we return stuff from our PDO queries, that it will come back as an object, not an array. The other thing we want to do, because we want to deal with errors as exceptions, not as just standard errors, is we want to do a set attribute method here of PDO attribute error mode, and that's going to be error mode exception. So we're going to set two attributes. The first is that the fetch mode is to fetch an object. The second is that the error mode should be to raise exceptions, not just give error messages to the output stream. How do we run a query? Okay, so that's set up our connection. How do we run a query? Sorry, I'm going to need a drink. I'm now feeling we're into the second error. Okay, so how do we run our queries? So we need to send a valid SQL query to the server, we'll come back to that, by creating a PDO statement which will be a prepared statement. Now this is crucially important. One of the reasons for going the PDO route is because PDO will automatically sanitize query parameters. So we no longer have to sort of think through, okay, we've got a query to put to our database, how do I make sure that I don't pass over a Bobby drop tables as we thought the other week? Well, we do it by using PDO and putting our statements into a prepare, through the prepare method. So I'm not sure if dollar statement is what I would use here. I think on later slides you'll see that we've got dollar query. We're actually going to build up our query by doing our database connection prepare, and we're going to make our query will be select everything star from game where developer ID equals question mark, we don't know yet, and release date is greater or equal to question mark. That's the second thing we don't know. So we've got two things in there that we don't know represented by queries, and that's prepared our statement. When we want to then execute that statement, we can now do dollar statement, or if, as we see on a later slide where we decided no, that makes more sense to call it dollar query, it would be dollar query execute, and these are now the two values. One will go into developer ID equals 1, and 2007 1010 will go into release date greater or equal to 1. Okay, so that's how it works. And if you do that, it is possible to mangle PDO and do this differently without doing it in the two parts. You have then completely ignored the whole point of doing PDO, because if you put these bits straight into here, yes, it will work, and now it's not going to sanitize the inputs properly. Okay, we've just completely ruined the whole point of doing it. So that's why you need to go back to that slide, if or maybe in the labs, and check how this is working to see what's going on there. I'm saying that as much, not just for you, but for the video. Okay. So now we've run our query. So back here we had statement execute, or a query execute, however we put it. So now how are we going to get the results back? Well, this will now give us in our object the result. So we're now going to say $game is equal to fetch the result from statement. Now statement fetch will get, we might have, think of the result coming back, like last week we had a number of cars coming back in the query. Each block of data will come back with a fetch. So that fetch will get the next block of data, the next record that it's found through doing the query. So that's why we've got the while statement, so that while we're getting a result, $game is the result that it's coming from the next fetch. So it's found a number of games which match having the developer ID 1 and the release date greater or equal to 10th of October 2007. Okay. So what's it going to do with that? Okay, well, it doesn't matter. But what we're going to say is, okay, let's just echo $game name, find the names of all the games that have been found through that query. So that's what that one is doing. Okay. we want to think through the fact that when we're running these queries, we're getting back an object, and it would be really, really nice to be able to use the results to populate our own classes. Why? Because, well, first of all, it will be better typed, but also you can write class functions now. So if you've written a class function, a class, and you bring the object back mapped into that class, then you can write functions in there that will enable you to do stuff within the class. So it's going to be a really nice way of doing things. So to do that, we can use $statement fetch object. So make sure we're fetching it as an object with the class name in there, and that will then bring the object in and map it into our class definition. So we can now start to put in the attributes, the methods and stuff that we want in that class definition, and do what we want with it. So this has now changed very slightly. So we had, while $game equals statement fetch, echo the game name, but we need to know what was coming in. With this one, we can now do $game equals $statement fetch object game, which puts, we have to have defined the class game, and now we can know that because we've defined what the attributes are in game. We can just say echo $game age. So we've not only got the game names, we can put all the other stuff in if we know what we're looking for there. What about other queries? So what we've done so far is somewhere, select. So we're just picking out the database. Here we've got, we can do also update, so we can update the database, we can delete things from the database. I don't think you'll be able to delete this week. We give you certain permissions on the databases week by week, and I think this week we will not be giving you delete permission, but generally you can do update and delete, and on the coursework you'll be able to delete some things, not others. But they're done in exactly the same way. And how do you get the queries from the browser? Well, we've been looking at that with the forms, so we know about $get and $post, and we can get the queries across from the browser that way. So PDO will show you SQL errors, and you may need, there's a slide somewhere that says about, it'll be coming up, we'll be looking at error tracking and so on, and how we track the errors. But we're thinking now about the fact that however we've done it, we're getting an error back when we run an SQL query. So this is now quite important because, I'll do this now because it's quite important. As we get into handling MySQL databases in PHP, one of the problems you've got is you write your web page and it's got all the SQL queries and stuff, and you get stuff and you render it in the page, and you look at that and something's not working right, and maybe you've got an error, and you're thinking, I'm struggling a bit with this, where has it gone wrong? Well, the problem is there are various steps going on, and you need to be able to work out which bit has actually broken. So basically, when you've got a web browser, you start with a web browser and you click something. The web browser is sending the query over to the web server. Okay, the web server is now running the PHP, and there could be an error in the HTML code, but there could be an error in the PHP code. But now the PHP code is running, and it's saying, oh, but I need stuff from the database. The database is, at least logically, on a separate server. It might actually be the same machine, of course, but logically it's a separate server. So it has to create this connection, as we thought about so far, and it now needs to say, okay, build up the query, run the query, and it goes over to this server, which now takes the MySQL query. It runs the query, and there may be an error in the MySQL query, or there might be an error in what it's getting or not getting from the database, whatever it is. Now this needs to return the result to the PHP, so we're back onto the web server. Now the PHP is picking up that result and doing stuff with it, and it needs to return a result in HTML to the browser back here. We've got all those steps. So there's step 1 is to the PHP web server, step 2 is to the MySQL server, step 3 is running that query, step 4 is bringing it back to the web server, step 5 or wherever I've got to is coming back to the web browser, and step 6 is rendering. There's a number of steps. It could happen, there could be a mistake anywhere in that. And so you need a way of sorting out how you're going to track the errors. And first of all, being aware of the fact there's all those different steps where there could be a problem is a first step in understanding it. Another good tactic in problem solving is to use the binary divide. You know about the binary divide? If you've got sort of like, here's 20 places where something might be going wrong. Let's cut it in half somehow. We'll test these 10. Is there an error here? Oh no, right. Is the test? Oh right. So the error's on this side. Now we're down to 10. Cut it in half. So we've got 5 here and 5 here. Is the error in these? And so you break it down, and it's much quicker than trying to go through all 20 one by one. So if we go straight to the MySQL server and sort out if the MySQL query is working on the MySQL server, we've split the problems in half. We know whether it's a going in problem or a coming out problem at least, and that halves the problems that we've got. So that's why it's saying here, if you're getting errors, try prototyping the MySQL query in an SQL app first, and test it directly on the server. Is it doing what you think it's meant to be doing? Oh no, it isn't. That's the problem. Get the statement right, okay? If it is running all right, then you can come back and say, okay, so maybe I need to check whether PHP is creating the MySQL query correctly. That's very often a problem. So what I often do at that point is say, okay, let's get the PHP to generate the query string first, and then build it up and echo it out so I can see what I've actually got, and often, particularly with quotes and stuff, because you've got the quotes to the PHP and you've got the quotes to the MySQL, and you very often find that what you thought looked perfect in your PHP, when you echo it out, you think, oh, that isn't what I thought it would do. So you've tracked it there, and then you've got the same thing of, okay, but if it's right there on the MySQL server, why has it failed on the return trip? That's less common, but it can happen. So that's why we're saying here, prototype the query first in an SQL app, and then write it in your PHP application. So exceptions now, exceptional circumstances. These are Russell's slides, and I can sort of picture Russell's tone of irony as he says it. So we're going to now look at exceptional circumstances. Earlier we configured PDO to throw exceptions when it encounters a problem. Sometimes you might even want to catch them. Okay, how do you do that? Well, it's a try-catch block. So try, with your brackets, $query is $database prepare. Oh look, we switched to $query from $statement. So that's the bit I was saying varies from the beginning and end of the slides. Watch out for it. $query is $database prepare, select star from game, $query execute. Then we'll do a catch, PDO exception error. So when you catch errors, you can catch $error, which will catch everything. What we're saying here is, now I don't want to catch any error, I only want to catch PDO exception errors. So that's the one I'm particularly looking for here. That's why you would do a try and catch in that way. So try catch, PDO exception error, print our $error, and that would just tell us what the error is. That's how you do it. What about getting the number of the results? So when you run a MySQL query, we thought earlier about the fact that you might have a number of games coming back that meet the criteria of developer ID 1, and it's written since from 2010 onwards. How do we do that? We can do it with row count. So here's an example. $statement. Oh, we've gone back to $statement instead of the query. $statement equals database prepare, blah, 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 as we had before. $statement execute. do it. Now we can say echo we found, and we do dollar statement or dollar query if we put that as dollar query, row count games, and that will tell you how many games it's found, so you know how many it's going to iterate around. If you're using a while or a for each or whatever, it'll just handle it for you, but sometimes it's useful to know how many there are. There is a read-only database that you can try, which should be working. I can't test it from home because I still, we've got another change this year in terms of how the VPN works. So from home, I'm not on the VPN. You have to be inside the universities for this to work. So, you know, get to the labs or here or wherever, but just you can test it and see. So the host is comp2203 ECS Sutton AC UK. The username is test data. The password is that. Do not try copying it in the sense of, you know, look at it, K. In any case, that's probably an O, and that's, I don't know whether those are O's or zeros. Just stretch across there on the slide and do a copy and paste. And the schema name is test data. So you can have a play with that and then start doing some SQL queries on it. So there's a few things here about reference. So PDO, PHPNet /PDO is the PDO reference. I didn't think to check that. Typically, I would use the PHP manual for looking, when I know what I'm looking to check. I don't look at that to try and learn how to do PDO. So PHP Delusions is an excellent concise reference for PDO. Again, I haven't checked that that's still live. I ought to have done that. And do beware, do really, so hence my warnings at the start of the lecture. Do be very careful about outdated PHP MySQL reference. So you will find, this is what I'm worried about for Thursday, okay guys? If you just rock up to the lab and just do it and start using MySQL and MySQLi, you can look forward to a lot of pain. Please make sure that you're sorted on PDO. We are not using MySQL and we are not using MySQLi. And if you start to try using them, you will give yourself a lot of pain. That's for anyone who hasn't realised how important that is. What about apps? So Mac and Windows, and actually Linux, MySQL Workbench is fully featured and therefore a bit complex, but it works nicely. On Mac you've got SQL Pro, which is good. All the above are better than PHP MyAdmin, and I'm just trying to remember, is it MySQL Workbench? I think it is the MySQL Workbench that I use on Linux, but it is really nice. But we're suggesting avoid PHP MyAdmin. Can I just ask you, I guess you guys probably all use either Windows or Mac, is that right?
Yes.
Right, okay. So if you're Mac, go for SQL Pro. If you're Windows, it's going to have to possibly be MySQL Workbench, I think. And that's it. So we are at 20 past 10. We could do that last little bit of design, but I think it will feel odd now.
Yeah.
So if you're happy, we'll call it a day at that.
Yes.
And see you Thursday.
Yeah.
So no 4 o'clock. If you're watching this on the live stream or later, there is not a 4 o'clock session. We are done for this week. See you Thursday. Turn that off.